This is Moshe coming to you from Israel and the Galilee on 20th of October, 9:37 in the morning. And our weather is cool, 68 degrees now. We'll hit 84 in the peak of the afternoon, like around 3, 4 o'clock. Tomorrow about the same, and then it gets cooler on Tuesday, Wednesday with lows in the 50s and highs in the high 70s. So we're in our fall, early fall, so we're still getting warm weather. It's going to continue hitting about 80, low 80s for a while, which is good. This is our good weather. So I go outside in the morning. I'm still wearing shorts and a t-shirt, but I put my sweatshirt on, which is a heavy sweatshirt. So, being a Bible believing site, I'm going to do some praise. We're Old Testament, New Testament. There is no God like Jehovah. 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 There is no Messiah like Yeshua. 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 All right. What I'm going to cover today is basically there's a bunch of retired colonels and generals running all over the internet. There's about 3 or 4, I don't know. Mostly they're American ones. The ones from Europe I'm not covering here. They're retired American colonels and generals. I haven't seen majors. And I want to tell you that they're giving you disinformation and they're leaving a lot of things out and they're twisting things around. So you're not really going to understand what America and Israel are doing and what Russia and Ukraine are doing. You're not going to get it because they're confusing the people. Okay, first of all, remember, a lot of these guys have been retired for years. Now, I'll tell you how this works. You retire your buddies in the military. By the time 2 to 3 years rolls on, they're retired too. Okay? And a lot of people in the military, when they're facing retirement, well, now with the stress it would be, but a lot of times they give them nothing to do. The same with federal agents when they get ready, not police, federal, when they get ready to retire, because they don't want to drag them in for court cases and stuff like that. The last 2 years or so, they give them not a lot to do. They might teach, they might be administrators, they sit in the office. They don't get them too involved, okay? Now, sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. If the person wants to be involved, they might be able to get, but as a general rule. Okay, so these colonels and generals have friends in the military, and for about 2 or 3 years after their retirement, they can access information that maybe they shouldn't be accessing. Nobody's going to hand them secret documents, but they could talk to them and get an idea in a candid fashion roundabout what's going on. Sometimes. So when their friends retire, now they're down to friends of their friends. So their friends that retire 2 or 3 years later, they may be able to do it for 2 or 3 years. But these guys that you see, they've been retired for 15, 25 years. Okay? They got no info. Okay? They know how to read the news and read into things, but they're not getting any real info out of the military anymore. Long ago, that's finished. Okay? Their days for doing that are over. Okay? Now, if you don't see a guy getting on social media that's been retired maybe 2, 3, 4, or even 5 years ago, why? He's afraid to. Why? Because he knows stuff. He knows about radar, bases, secret missiles, and secret planes and boats that nobody knows about, capabilities of military weapons that are all classified and nobody knows about outside the military structure. Okay? So he's scared to death to get out there and talk about anything. But when you're 15, 20 years out, anything you do is worthless now. So they talk. You got to understand this. Now, I'm going to develop this further with you, and then I'm going to cover what they're telling people, and they're really widespread. That guy, Judge Napoli, whatever, Tano, whatever his name is, he puts these people on, and they are anti-Israel, okay? And they're not really pro-America that much either. They're kind of weird people, okay? But they're really hateful to Israel. They come off with comments that are similar to what you get from the Muslim terrorist media. And I'll develop this with you. I'm not going to point fingers and names, but you know who they are. You've seen them. You've heard them. I'm going to explain to you what they're telling you that's wrong, and I'm going to do it in such a way. Not one of these bozos ever uses the Bible. Not one. Not one. So now you know they're in darkness. All right? Let me go into the chat, make sure we got sound and picture, and then we'll get going. Let me modify my screen a little bit here. Okay. Well, that's weird. Let's go back. There we go. That's weird. Let's go back. All right, we got sound and picture, and let me put my quick posts up there. I'll just be a few seconds. Not long. Just checking for typos. I'm going to put my email address up and that'll be it. So if you want to send in prayer requests or toss requests or ask me to cover a scripture, as long as it's somewhat related, I'll try to accommodate. Okay, I'm done. I do have a prayer request. I'm afraid I'll forget, so let me put it out there. It's for a cat, and we do pray for animals a lot, and we usually do pretty good with those prayers. The cat's name is Honey Bear. We want to pray for healing for Honey Bear. Cat has a lot of vomiting right now. So healing for a cat named Honey Bear. Vomiting. Honey bears. I'm sorry, honey bears. All right. Let me cover some of the news that's going on before we get into it. And some of it, I would say, is rather, um, I hate to say, bad news because it's prophecy being fulfilled, but the world would call it bad news. First off, National Guards deployed in Texas, Michigan, and New York to shut down the gangs, which I think are predominantly from Venezuela, illegally entering the country. And they're occupying apartment buildings and making the people pay rent to them and all kinds of sick stuff. And the National Guard is being brought in to do something about that. I'm not sure what they're going to do. But we previously, a few days ago, were hearing that now the United States military is authorized to use deadly force in the United States now against civilians. Now, what's a civilian? If a civilian is somebody that's not wearing a military uniform from another country, okay, that's a civilian. All right. So they're authorized to do that now, and I think this feeds right into National Guard, which is military, being mobilized to engage with these gangs to get them to cease and desist what they're doing, or do a military exercise and get them out of the houses, the apartment buildings. We'll see what they do. They could put them on patrol in and around the apartment buildings, like they could put 3 or 4 on the roof. They could put 3 or 4 in the lobby, put 3 or 4 in the front, and they'll have military weapons, they'll have body armor, they'll have communications, and they might have they might have a Humvee with a machine gun mounted on it or something. I don't know what they're going to do. I really don't know. Or they might just take 50 of them and go into a building and go door to door and clear every apartment house. In other words, knock and explain where the military, probably police will be with them and talk about why they're there and say we have to inspect your apartment, go in the closets, under the bed, and make sure none of these guys are hiding in there. How they were going to identify who these guys are, I'm not sure yet, probably with ID, and things of this nature. And then find the ones that don't belong there and just put them in twist ties, lead them to a vehicle, stage them in the vehicle under guard, and then bring them someplace and do something with them. What that something is going to be, I don't know. Okay, that's what it looks like to me. Police are not equipped to do this type of thing normally, or the city mayor and police chief don't want them to, or I don't know what the deal is. The city cops and the sheriff may not, the sheriff may not be invited into an incorporated city to help, although he would have jurisdiction in there. He may not want to step on the toes of the police chief. And the policemen and women are usually cowardice. They're mercenary types. They're in it for the money and the prestige of being a cop, which used to be prestigious, not anymore. And they probably are not going to want to engage these gang members who are more than likely going to have pistols and full auto AK-47s. They might have more advanced weapons available to them, like RPGs, hand grenades. I don't know. Okay? So the military is more used to dealing with this. We have to watch this closely. I don't think it's starting a revolution or anything like that. And I think the empowering of the United States military to use that deadly force, which could mean artillery and other things, on Americans, civilians, would very possibly be to handle the illegal aliens, as they call them, that have entered the U.S. illegally, and some have filed for refuge status, and things like this, and then they get a court date. And things like this. So they're not wearing a military uniform, so they have to be assumed to be civilians. Okay, that's what I think it was for. On October 19th, Ukraine launched a large drone attack on St. Petersburg, which is considered one of the major cities in America. So you could equate it to something like, Miami, Atlanta, Detroit. It's a big major city, right? And it's not the capital, that's Moscow. And this big drone attack caused blackouts in either all of St. Petersburg or a very substantial portion of it. So they hit the power grid there. It was drones, it was not long range missiles. And they also hit Russian parts manufacturing facilities. I understand for the S-400 and for Ishkar missile and another one of their missiles. So basically, it's putting the lights out, which of course would curtail production in all the factories and take out the military goods manufacturing facilities in Russia. This would be considered a deep strike into Russia, but again, it was drones. And at the same time, approximately, maybe there was, 8 or 10, 12 hours or something apart, there was a Russian drone flying near, what was it? I have my notes, Romania. And the key point to take away from this is that NATO, not Romania, NATO launched, I believe it was 2 F-16s and 2 F-18s to follow this Russian drone, I think it was, provoking Romania, possibly collecting intel. It could have been there to provoke, to do cyber attack. I don't know. It could have been a suicide drone. And eventually, after about 2 hours, the jets lost track of the drone for some reason, unbeknownst to anybody, or they're not talking about it. And the reason that this is a very big deal is it was not Romania that launched jets, it was NATO. NATO is staging in various parts of Russia's border to attack Russia. And Russia is apparently preparing to attack NATO. I mean, this is the posturing right now. And it's, usually posturing like that can go a long time and not result in a war. But since we're in end times, don't make those assumptions. Expect to see many unexpected things like exploding pagers and walkie-talkies. Okay? North Korea yesterday threatened to declare war on America and South Korea. Now we're going to dig into this because it's serious. China's been transporting weapons. They have a bridge route into North Korea from China. It's been a considerable amount of trucks carrying what is believed to be ammunition, weapons, and possibly soldiers into North Korea. And South Korea is taking it rather seriously. I saw videos, they deployed a rather large squadron of their helicopters. I mean, it looked like 25 or more even, down to the DMZ, but there was no shooting. So maybe they were just posturing, I don't know. But South Korea is definitely not happy about what's going on. Now, what we need to take away from this is North Korea is a proxy state of China. Okay? Now, Ukraine is a proxy state of America and NATO. Don't kid yourself. How do they deal with Ukraine? Well, they don't put Ukraine in NATO, right? Okay. They don't put any substantial amount of NATO or American troops in Ukraine. They have advisors and things like that, but not in a combat role per se. And they provide Ukraine with money and weapons in mass. They load them up with weapons. Ukraine has lost a lot of soldiers, and they are not fighting with rifles and bayonets. They're using higher technology weapons. Okay? And what this is doing is it's letting the NATO countries weaken Russia. Did Russia start it? Yes. Did Russia invade Ukraine as part of its imperialistic, let's build the USSR back again? Yeah, for sure they did. So did Russia ask for it? No doubt. No doubt about it. Okay? But what is NATO and America doing by the constant feeding of weapons into Ukraine? And they also provide reconnaissance and intelligence info, using spy drones, spying planes, all kinds of electronic eavesdropping, to give Ukraine better intelligence that it's not capable of acquiring or collecting on its own. So Ukraine is combating Russia, who invaded them, and what is this doing? Well, Russia's lost a massive amount of military equipment, trucks, tanks, armored personnel carriers, jeeps, mobile artillery. They've lost jets. They've lost drones. Incidentally, they're saying that the drones they got from Iran they're considering them I think it's called the Shakid or something. They're considering them worthless because they launched a pretty good amount of them, and 95% of them, or 87%, or some high figure, get taken down. So the United States is using Ukraine to keep weakening NATO, and they're going to get NATO as weak as it can, Russia as weak as it can, and then when the time comes, they'll provoke a war with Russia, which is child's play. Put NATO troops in Ukraine, start shoving Russia out of Ukraine, and there you have it. They've already occupied like 135 kilometers of Russian territory with the help of NATO forces, I understand. And as far as I know, they still have that territory. So Russia's even occupied now. Now, forget deterrence and stuff like that. Deterrence is to stop a war. It doesn't always work, okay? It really doesn't. Look back in history over many centuries, we've had wars. Countries build a big army, and the other countries build a big army, and they still have a war. It's all through history. And I'm not talking just about Israel's wars through history, the nations fighting each other. So, what America and NATO has done is made Ukraine into a proxy to weaken Russia. Okay? And if any point in time they want to pull out and tell Ukraine, Zelensky, you can come live in Washington, D.C., and maybe 5 or 6 other top people, and then the rest of them they got to surrender to Russia, which they have no choice about. And Russia would be fair to probably 90% of them. They would purge the intelligence agents, look for revolutionary elements in the military and the government of Ukraine that would try to bring an uprising or a rebellion against Russia, and then they would, tell everybody if you have a gun or a rifle or ammo in your house, you're going to get 199 years in jail, and we'll take your house away and bankrupt your family and all that stuff, right? So they'll turn in all the weapons, and then Russia will, now go get a job and go to work and, take the bus and come home and be with your family and watch TV, and, that's it. Russia's not going to exterminate them. They're going to go after the CIA types, military intelligence types, internal security forces like FBI, and the rest of them are not going to suffer. These intelligence agents will, to a great extent, disappear the way Russia operates. They'll be taken for interrogation and never come home like the Gestapo or the Stasi would do. So the other people won't really suffer, and a lot of the intelligence people will get out of Ukraine before it gets to that point. They'll get away. And Russia won't hunt them down, and as long as they're out of Ukraine, they're not going to care that much. So they have as long as they don't put real boots on the ground, like start sending battalions and tank brigades and airplanes and helicopters, they have an easy out. They just leave, They just stop giving them weapons. Tell Ukraine it's been nice, come live in Washington, Zelensky, and the rest of them go fend for themselves, I understand there's a tremendous amount of corruption in Ukraine, so they got plenty of money. They might sell weapons and equipment to other countries. So the people at the top will head for the hills with getting passports in different names and go live some other place. And Russia might go after a few of them or something, but it's not a high priority of Putin's. It's not that interested in that, because as long as they don't get back into Ukraine, it's not a threat. So let's compare America with Ukraine. Okay? Let's start at the beginning so you get this. For many years, Biden said, I don't want Netanyahu coming here. He can't stand Netanyahu, which Obama was the same way. Once Netanyahu came there and they put him in a waiting room in the White House and kept him there for many hours. They tried getting military analysts to talk to Netanyahu and explain to him all the wonderful things they were going to do for Netanyahu if he gave up the West Bank, which includes the Temple Mount area in East Jerusalem, so they could never build the temple. Remember that. That's a big fear of Satan. Okay? So, Netanyahu never bought it. Okay? He's not that dumb. What happened in 2008 with Gaza, which that idiot Netanyahu was in favor of, giving Gaza back, and using our own military to drive the settlers out of Gaza, they call them settlers in the media, crying and weeping and everything else. And America gave Israel a lot of military-type guarantees to protect Israel about this, which is really the dominant reason why America is giving military aid to Israel. A lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it stems back to this all comes from Gaza. Okay, but it's expanded way beyond Gaza too. So they are really giving military aid to Israel. But they're trying to control Israel. Bring the humanitarian aid into Gaza, Netanyahu, and within 24 hours there's 50 trucks of humanitarian aid coming in. The day after that, the UAE does a big airdrop of humanitarian aid. And the idiots managed to drop a package of humanitarian aid that the parachute didn't open. They did an airdrop at the beach, and a guy was down at the beach, and he was waiting for the package. It hit him and killed him. The one guy that got killed in Israel, I think 2 days ago or 3 days ago, they said somebody in Israel did get killed. It was not a Jew, it was an Arab. So the chances are extremely high, overwhelmingly high, he was a Muslim. Okay? And then people still don't realize that God is protecting Israel. But God hasn't brought his offense yet. Israel military has brought their offense, but the military is not of God. The two witnesses are his offense. Zechariah 12:6. The two judges of Israel, which judges are prophets and the witnesses are prophets as per Revelation 11. They burn up the enemies, laying siege to Judah and Jerusalem round about on all sides. Now, that got to be the two witnesses. It's not the Israeli military because it speaks of two individuals. And Isaiah 1 says that God will run Israel again with the judges. And like at the beginning, which was Moses and Aaron, they were judges. They were also prophets. The two witnesses are judges. They're also prophets. And it also says the 70 counselors. So, where was I? So, America's still trying to get us to give the West Bank back. But look how they treat us with Gaza. So then they also told Netanyahu not to bomb Beirut, but then there was discrepancy in the media and said that never happened. But there was a 5-day period when Netanyahu didn't bomb Beirut. Yesterday, last night, the day before, we've been bombing Beirut heavy, extremely often. Okay. But the humanitarian aid is flowing in. Okay. Now we need to talk about the leak in the United States intelligence system going to the Washington Post, going around the world about Israel's plans and strategies. Going back maybe 25, 30 years now, America has been hiring Muslims to work in the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, Justice Department, FBI, every intelligence agency, in the military. They're all over the place in the American government, tons of them. So they're trying to make you think, oh, Biden is so anti-Israel. He's saying, oh, I have a good idea what America's attack on Iran's going to be, and then the Washington Post publishes it. Look, it's more than likely not America and the White House doing it on purpose, because you do it once, Israel's not going to want to share information. You do it a second time, they're just not going to share information. So it's a little stupid. Now, why aren't these guys being prosecuted? All you got to do is have NSA tap all the communications in the Washington Post. And is that going to get it for them? Maybe not. Why? Because these documents can be sent to the Washington Post from Lebanon, from Iraq, from Russia, from China, from Iran, from various places like that. So yeah, they could hide who they are. And the FBI and NSA and everybody could be laying away from them, but it's not that difficult to do it. All you got to do is send it out of another country that's not going to cooperate with the United States. So yeah, they can do it that way. And then the Washington Post publishes it. Is the Washington Post criminally liable for doing it? Well, yes and no. If they want to make the Washington Post responsible criminally for doing this, they can. But the defense for the Washington Post would be, well, they released it in the public domain. So what does that mean? It means there's a social media platform somewhere like a Twitter or a Russian equivalent of Twitter, or an Iranian, or a Chinese, or something somewhere, and they put it up over there, and they tell the Washington Post to go there, and then the Washington Post goes there and copies it and distributes it, and then the FBI comes in and says, "Where'd you get this?" "Well, we got an email with this link, and it was Chinese social media, so we printed it. It was out in the public domain." And the chances of prosecuting them and getting a conviction would be close to zero, unless the Americans wanted to railroad. So, but it's probably Muslims inside the American government that are releasing this information. That's what I believe, in my opinion. And that's why it's continuing. Because they want to destroy relationships with Israel and America as much as they can. And they're hoping that this brings an alienation or separation between America and Israel. But the Mossad understands these things. And, it's a liability you have when you deal with America. But it's not these, it's not regular American intelligence people running around, doing it. That I don't believe, because they would put them in jail. They would, or they would fire them, their pension. They would be ostracized. They're not going to do it. They could make them go away. America can make somebody go away too if they want to. The guy's walking down the street, a van pulls up, points a gun at him. All of a sudden, there's 2 or 3 people behind him with guns. They say, "Get in the van." It's all done very fast, 4, 5, 6 seconds. "Get in the van now, in, I'll shoot you." They don't give him the time to think. They press his hands on his sides. He gets in the van. They disarm him. If he's armed, they start binding him. They can chloroform him or whatever. And he just disappears. They just take him to where? A meat grinder or something, or chemically dissolve him. Anything like that. You can chemically dissolve somebody. You have to have a secure location, like a building you have somewhere full of government agents, and you drag the guy in, and you're driving him in a car, and the guy's operating the car has got federal credentials and badges. So if they get pulled over, they say, "Federal agent, I'm on business. It's a high security situation. Go away, or we'll arrest you for interfering." That's it, and then drive away. And then they go into this facility. They take the guy out. Of course, they give him an injection or something beforehand, probably in the van, that kills him. They could just give him potassium. They could give him a full huge horse syringe of morphine, whatever. The guy's gone, and then they just take him and they throw him in a vat of chemicals, and he sits there, and maybe that's it. They might have to take the bones out and put him in a different vat of chemicals, and he's just gone. Or they could use a crematorium, burn him into ashes. You're not going to get DNA out of ashes. When they're finished with the ashes, just flush them down the toilet or something, It's easy to do it. The mafia's been doing this for years. Veterinarian offices have crematoriums for animals that die, and they use those. What do you call it? Funeral parlors have them. It is so easy. Okay. So South Korea is upset. Now let me tell you what's really wrong with this picture. These guys use these programs that monitor ship movements in different parts of the world and aircraft movement, right? You've probably seen them. The first big problem with these systems is you don't know what the heck's going on. You see a C-17 plane, they can identify it, right? Okay, what's on the C-17? Oh, we think it's likely equipment, military equipment coming to this country. How do you know it's not food or TV sets? How do you know it's not computers? How do you know it's not uniforms? How do you know it's not soldiers? How do you know it's not flying there empty to bring something back to America? How do you know you don't know what it is? So they sit there and they speculate. And people sit there and listen to this and say, ooh, I'm getting great intel. I think it's practically a waste of time. When you see a lot of aircraft go into a certain country and tensions are high, yeah, then you could start assuming correctly that it's military and military equipment. This I grant them. But let's talk about what's happening in the last, 48 hours or so in the area of Taiwan, Japan, South Korea. Okay. Now, these services that pick these aircraft and naval vessels up do so based on their transponder. That's how they can tell you it's the C-17 or it's a destroyer or a submarine or whatever, right? Well, what's happened now in this whole area, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, is all the transponders are turned off. And when you look at the screens, it looks like these entire regions have no military aircraft or any military naval presence, which is absurdly idiotic with tensions so high and war so close. They just shut off all their transponders, which is highly irregular for that to happen. And it could be correctly deduced or deducted that this is a sign that they're coming close to a military conflict over there. The last year, I never heard about this happening. Now they're really seriously nervous. North Korea has 700 artillery systems and various missile pod launcher systems on the border with South Korea. 700, that's huge. Huge, I mean, it's huge. And South Korea is not enjoying this at all. They're ticked off. I'm telling you, the South Koreans can fight. They're not lunatics. They're not going to sit there and have a meeting with their religious mullah and come off the meeting and saying, we're going to fight to the last bullet. If we die, we'll immediately be in heaven with our virgins. And if we win, we win. They're not that way. Those people are not that hard to defeat because they have a fatalistic attitude. What was it? I think it was Patton said, you're not here to die for your country, you're here to help the enemy die for his country. Okay? So they make it easy for an enemy because they do stupid things. They behave stupidly. Okay? I like the Japanese people. I have a lot of respect for the Japanese people. I had a lot of contact with them in martial arts, and quite a few are very nice. And I would have to say in World War II they behaved as stupidly as some of these die-hard, crazy, psychotic Muslim terrorist groups do. When they were trapped by the Allied forces in the Pacific, they were in caves and underground, sound familiar? And they were pulling the pins out of hand grenades and holding them against themselves and blowing themselves up. To help the cause of Japan, it would have been better if they surrendered because it would have drained the American military. Americans were not, well, at times in the war, they were treating them pretty bad. They weren't taking prisoners, but later on they were. But anyway, that was, and they also did what was called bonsai attacks. They would rush American fortified military positions with squad machine guns, and the American or the Allies had cover. and they had rifles, some full auto, some semi-auto, and they would charge them out in the open and get mowed down for the sake of their ancestors. They were doing this. This is goofy stuff, right? And they were led to believe that their emperor was a direct descendant of God. In other words, he was a god. And they weren't allowed to walk on his shadow. Yeah, I don't think they were allowed to look at him. They couldn't see him. I mean, all this stuff, that was taken from the Bible, Not really. It was just silly things, and they were led to believe this stuff. And when the officers would lose a battle, I don't think in the modern military it happened a lot, but they would kill themselves. One of their big admirals lost a fleet of aircraft carriers, which was back then 3 or 4 aircraft carriers and assorted vessels. The Americans ambushed them by good intel, and the guy, his ship, he was on an aircraft carrier and it got damaged, and he transferred himself to a destroyer. They knew that because they were hitting his radio signals. And the destroyer was hit, and, he gave the call to, abandon ship. They still had a few other destroyers that were functioning that were going to take the sailors on and skidoo out of there, and the Americans let him escape. And he said, no, I'm going to stay here and go down with the ship. And because the ship had a lot of high technology on it, him and I think 1 or 2 of his high officers felt they lost face by losing the battle. So they remained on the ship, and they directed the lower officers of the destroyer to scuttle the ship. So they fired, I guess, 2 torpedoes at the ship, and it blew up and burned, and they got killed and went down in the ocean with the ship, So they were still doing this, craziness, They lose a battle, the officer kills himself, They treated prisoners of war brutally in Japan because they thought they were low-level scum for surrendering instead of committing suicide. They treated them really badly. That was a mistake. And they had POW camps that were brutal, and when the war was over, a lot of these guys were hiding in the civilian population in Japan, and the Allied occupied forces was hunting them down because of the brutality, and they were, putting them in prison and hanging them or whatever. They were brutal. They were torturing people and everything else. So anyway, this is an old theme that Satan has cooked up. And then they have another one, the bonsai attack. And then they had the kamikaze drone. But in the case of Japan, it was a real pilot. We have kamikaze drones today, but nobody's in it. It's a bunch of batteries and electricity and, and stuff like that. But, they put a real pilot on it. And it was they'd launch them off aircraft carriers. He had a big bomb in the thing, and they gave him enough fuel for one way, and they dressed him up for a ceremony on the deck. He had a nice white scarf, and and they were sending him to heaven to be with his ancestors. There was a lot of that crap going on with them. And the guy got in his plane, and everybody saluted him, and he was a big shot. And they'd send a bunch of them, and they would take off, and they would go to where American ships were frequently, and they would try to drive their aircraft into the American ship and cause tremendous damage to the ship. So the soldiers, the sailors, would try, as if their life depended on it, because it did, to take these guys down with machine guns, and they were highly effective during World War II. The gunners on aircraft and Navy ships were very highly trained. They practiced with moving targets. They would train them in skeet shooting. They gave them a shotgun. I guess it was probably a 12 gauge. And they threw skeet up, and they got their eye-hand coordination, to follow the skeet, lead it, shoot it, blow the skeet up. They really did this. I don't know if they do it anymore today because they use radar, but back then they didn't have radar controlling guns. They didn't have laser guns that could get the target, nothing like that. So they also had them shoot moving targets. They pulled targets in the air like a float being dragged by an aircraft with a cable. They would shoot at that, practicing leading it. Um, and they washed out a lot of guys. It was months they trained these guys so they could really take out targets. The This was mostly the Air Force gunners, but I believe it was done a lot with the Navy guys too. They practiced, and you know, the their life depended on it. And they had drills and practicing, so they had a metal sight. It was a round thing with circles in it, and they had, mounted to the ship, usually 50 caliber guns. Later in the war, they had 20 millimeter, which were really way superior. They'd hit the 50. The 50 would hit the planes, and the plane wouldn't break up. And if they didn't hit the pilot, it didn't work. And if they got the engine to catch on fire or something like that, the plane still had plenty of momentum. It was a bad thing, you know. It was really a bad thing. And they, it was like aircraft carriers in World War II. They had like a pit on the side of the deck, below the deck, maybe 5, 6 feet, 4 feet below the deck, not very full. And it was full along the sides. It was full of guns and operators to take out planes coming after the boat. So the planes that were attacking an aircraft carrier were basically flying into a wall of fire. But anyway, they had this same crazy mentality, but they were also vicious. They were also vicious, raping, cutting heads off with their swords, with prisoners. Um, they were brutal, They really were. But now the same samurai mentality has been conveyed through the martial arts and stuff like that, and they're in the Japanese military, and they're going to be a very formidable threat to China. And the South Koreans are every bit as capable as the Japanese, if not more so. They're vicious, tough fighters. I don't know much about the Taiwan military. I can't tell you they're fighting for their lives when it starts, and they're going to be pretty determined. I mean, there's no place to run to. So they're going to have to hold their ground and just dig in and fight. But I really don't know much about their military. But I'll tell you, the Japanese military is precise. Their equipment is superb. They got a ton of it. And they know what they're doing, and they don't run away. And the South Koreans, you got the same type of a thing going on over there. Excellent equipment, and they don't run away. So, with all these transponders turned off, that's because they're all China, North Korea, Japan, Taiwan, America, or whatever. They're all worried about a war breaking out because of the South Korean agitation going on. Now, is the North Korean irritation. Now, can North Korea just be posturing and they don't have any intention of actually pursuing an attack against South Korea? Absolutely. It could be to scare America relating to Iran, likely. But you've got to remember, we're talking, remember Ukraine, proxy of NATO and America. Israel is a proxy of NATO and America. In September, all of a sudden, Biden says, yeah, Netanyahu could come here anytime he wants. A few days later, Netanyahu goes to America, 23rd of September, stays and meets with Biden. Comes home. 2.5 weeks later, October 7th happens. Now, what was wrong about October 7th? Well, we have so much defenses on the Gaza border. We have posts that are built, they're like watchtowers, And they put soldiers in there, and they frequently will use female soldiers and other kinds of soldiers that aren't really combat trained. And their job is to watch the infrared and regular cameras to see if we're getting people from Gaza trying to break into Israel, cut the barbed wire and get in Israel, right? And we got night cameras and we got that. Now, in the event that we do get an incursion, we have trackers that are Bedouin. They grow up in the desert. These guys will steal the skin off you before you know it in the desert at night. These guys are night warriors, and they track like an Apache or a Cherokee going back to the 1700s, okay? They have tracking skill. And they use with dogs, without dogs. If someone gets in, they track them down quickly and hard, and they eliminate them or they capture them. They don't let the guy just wander in, okay? So, on that day, the soldiers in the watchtowers were calling the military and saying, "We got an incursion, they're coming in. What is this? Where are you?" And they were laughing at him and saying, "No, you're imagining it. Nothing's happening. It's nothing. Ignore it," right? Sick stuff. Where were the trackers? I don't know. They weren't there. Why wasn't there more military around the border? I don't know. They just weren't there. Why were they not there? Very unusual. So the girl soldiers and the soldiers in the watchtowers mostly got killed or taken hostage. They came in, thousands of Hamas, with thousands of Palestinian civilians also to kill us, rape us, plunder us, everything. They came in paramotors. They walked in. Any which way they came in. Okay? And Netanyahu is anti-gun, which is idiotic. That's as stupid as giving out